just touch your life. It tears it apart, and then hands you the pieces and dares you to rebuild against all odds. What's up, y'all, and welcome back to Mindset, Health, and Empowerment, the Unfiltered Trainer podcast. I'm your host, Gina, and today we're diving into a subject that is very near and dear to my heart, grief. More specifically, how grief transforms us, shapes our identity, and forces us to rebuild from the very depths of who we are. In today's episode, we're going to get real. There's going to be some raw, honest conversation like there always is. And we're going to talk about how loss isn't just something that happens. It's something that changes you, challenges you, and ultimately shows you what you're made of. I'm going to share with you my personal grief journey from the loss of somebody who's still alive to watching loved ones slowly slip away, and what that's done to me as a person, a trainer, a human being, a business owner, and an author. This episode is all about grief gains, the unexpected strength and the power that we can discover through pain, loss, and transformation. So take a deep breath, maybe grab a tissue because I think I'm going to need one too, and let's dive in. I think grief is something that starts earlier than any of us even realize, and for me it began at the age of 10. The loss of my biological mother is already something that has cut me to my core for the duration of my existence. But my grief story isn't the kind where somebody passes away, you have closure, and you get to say goodbye. It's the kind where they're still alive somewhere, they're not emotionally present, they're not physically here. I don't even know where they are. It's a feeling of abandonment that stays with you for a lifetime. I was given up by my biological mother, a person who was supposed to love and protect me unconditionally to the day she died. And while I wasn't burying somebody, I was grieving the loss of a person who wasn't there. It was painful in a way that's hard to explain, especially when I had to face the reality that someone that should have been my foundation was never going to show up for me in the way I needed, and that kind of loss doesn't ever get easier with time. It's the kind of grief that you carry quietly, painfully, but it still shapes who you become. And that type of grief, for me, began a lifelong journey of trying to make sense of what abandonment really means and how it impacts our identity. It's something that can leave you questioning your worth, questioning your place in the world, and questioning love itself. For me, I know that I had a palpable fear of getting married and having children because for literally my entire life, I feared that what happened to me in my childhood and the experiences I had because of being abandoned was somehow going to be genetic, and I was going to do the same to my child. And because you don't know any better, and most people in your life haven't had this similar experience, there was no one to talk to or to share how I was feeling and have somebody understand and resonate on a level that they actually understood what you were going through. And I'm glad. Full disclosure, I am glad that at that time of my life, nobody else knew what I was going through, because I would not wish that level of hurt, pain, and confusion on any child or any person in general. That sense of abandonment stuck with me until I was 30 years old. When I turned 30, I always tell people that it's the best decade of your life because it was like somebody flipped a switch and I stopped giving a shit. I didn't care about people's opinions. I didn't care if people liked what I was doing. I didn't care if I looked a certain way and fit an aesthetic. I finally had made peace with myself. And that was what was so empowering about turning 30, is that for 20 years of my life, I strived for perfection. I worked harder every single day than I did the day before. I literally tried to be the best, do the most, because I thought one day, if I did enough, if I made enough money, if I accomplished enough, that I was going to be worthy. I finally was going to be worthy, and people would stop walking out of my life, and people would stop leaving me, and actually, maybe, I would feel love, unconditional love from this person. And at 30, 20 years later, I finally released these feelings and let go. And I provided myself the kind of closure that even if there was a conversation, it wouldn't have been as powerful or as an alignment because I healed myself and I learned and I grew, and I thankfully do not have that belief system anymore that I would cause harm or abandon or somehow hurt somebody I love. I think I've proven it time and time again that that is not who I am. And I know, because I have done the work, that I don't even think that it was necessarily who she was. I think sometimes that people aren't strong enough to break generational curses. And because she had similar experiences in her life, she repeated tendencies that she knew. In my opinion, I don't fault her, at no fault of her own. She did what she knew. And because she wasn't strong enough to do what needed to be done to break this generational trauma, it carried on with her biological children. Thankfully, my story is different because usually when you are given up by a biological parent, you're not always fortunate to have the other parent in your life. And I was. I was super lucky because I had a dad, and my dad had a big family. And until somebody called attention to my life and how different my life was when we changed schools, when all of this happened, I ended up changing schools. We had moved. My whole life got uprooted, obviously. And I left behind the first 10 years of my life. I actually have nothing from my childhood. And I am learning, as you will see in upcoming content that I am working on, is why I've been striving so hard to make my home feel safe and perfect, because I want a stable environment that no one can take away from me, and I want memories and memorabilia and moments that in the blink of an eye won't be taken away like they were of my childhood. And so I feel very blessed to have had an entire family that filled in this gap and made life as normal as it possibly could have been in that circumstance, and unconditionally loved us so that we didn't feel so unwanted and different, even though our life clearly was. And that's important because the bulk of this episode is going to talk about grief as an adult. The grief for me and my life that lasted 3.5 years. When you think about spending 20 years of your life fighting these tendencies, these thoughts, these patterns, you're actively doing so much to heal. Then you fast forward and now you're in adulthood. And grief is something that never left me. And full disclosure, I pushed a lot of people away in my life because I was afraid that I was somehow a modern day Grim Reaper. And you're probably going to laugh at that, and I can laugh about it too. But I really did feel like there was something wrong with me, that something was so out of alignment that I was receiving this negative karma, and I was so afraid to share that energy with other people, and people would be harmed because of it. And you'll understand more as we continue this episode as to why I did not want to be close to people during this phase of my life. Because grief never left. And when it decided to rear its ugly head, it came back in a different form. For a period of 3.5 years of my life, I experienced loss after loss after loss after loss. A total of 7 people in my life would pass away in that 3.5 years. I've had to watch my close friends and family battle terminal diagnoses, illnesses, and unexpected loss. I've seen people I loved slowly fade away right in front of me, not just in their bodies, but also in their spirit. Losing people you care about is something that strips away the illusion of control, which is something that I've been striving for my entire life, because when the first 10 years of your life are completely out of your control, you fight like hell to find it. Because of this, you realize how fragile life is. I spent months in limbo, never knowing where I was going to live, never knowing if I was going to stay at my job, never knowing what was next, because I was watching the people I loved so dearly fight for their life. And in the end, they were no longer with us. And even though I knew it was coming more times than I care to count, nothing prepares you for the moment when you realize somebody you care about won't be here anymore. And it doesn't stop hurting just because time moves forward. It doesn't make the pain fade any less. As people love to say, time heals all. No, it does not. Not in my opinion. I firmly believe that what time does is helps you to manage your grief. But that grief, it sits with you. It festers in your bones, especially when you realize that death isn't just a moment, it is an entire process. Watching people you love slowly pass away is a special kind of torture. And the grief of that slow, painful burn changes in ways you can't fully explain. I had this fear of wasting time because when it comes to death, there's this strange duality I've experienced. On one hand, I don't fear dying at all. I've come to terms with it because in some ways I almost welcome it, because I know that when my time comes, I'm going to be reunited with the people I've lost. And it is, I know, kind of eerie to say this, but it is a very comforting thought. But on the other hand, I've also realized that what I truly fear isn't death itself at all. It's wasting my life before I die. It's not living up to my full potential, not doing the things I'm meant to do, and not showing up as the person I want to be while I still have time to do the work. The fear of leaving this earth without having made an impact, without having left something real behind, is what haunts me to my core. I think that's the real challenge when you're facing loss, is you realize how precious time is, and that pressure to make the most out of everything is so overwhelming. The fear of dying without fully living is a battle I fight every single day. And it is in that fight that I've had to show up for myself, because if this has taught me anything, it's that nobody else can do the work for you. So as you're trying to work through grief, you're going to experience identity shifts. And for me, I had to rebuild from complete rock bottom. When you experience as much loss as I did, you've got to work through grief, and you have to learn how to rebuild yourself from rock bottom and how to show yourself grace in the process, which is something I am terrible at doing. Grief, as we've talked about, isn't just a wave of sadness. It's an entire transformation. It's the act of constantly remaking yourself from the ashes of what you once were. And let me tell you, this isn't easy. It's possible because I'm still alive. But I'm going to share with you some tangible tools and tips, as I always do, of things I've done to help me get through my grief journey, and strategies that were incredibly impactful. But when you're in the thick of it, and some of you listening may be experiencing what I experienced, summarizing what happened to me and to the people I love without giving details of people's personal lives 10 years ago, and that's why I'm making this episode. 10 years ago, next month, I was living in Florida. So 2 weeks leading up to August, I had been in Florida now when this all went down for 6 weeks. I was nursing a broken heart, and I so badly wanted to run away from everything. And I was so focused on my own needs and my own heartbreak that I had no clue what was about to happen to me. I'll never forget the day I got the call. And I've never forgot how my brother sounded on that call. Something had happened to our grandfather. He had had a fall, but something else was happening. He would get diagnosed with a brain stem stroke, and he would never recover. So, that man, if you do not know me, was my best friend. That man was my entire world. I love that man more than anything. The sadness that I saw on his face as he stood in the driveway as I pulled out to make the trek to Florida is something that I lived with regret for, because it was as if the universe was showing me something was happening. Something was coming for us. And I still left anyways, because you don't know. You don't know when your time or somebody you love's time is going to come to an end. So when I was down in Florida and I got that call, I immediately got in the car and I drove. I was in Nashville at the time at a conference. So I went from Nashville to Mississippi to pick up my belongings because I had left my car at a friend's. Got back in the car, past Nashville again, and drove back home to Pennsylvania. And I would be there for a short period of time where I would very clearly, as somebody in healthcare would know, that this man I love was not going to make it, and I had to make other arrangements. At the time, I was a traveling therapist, so I transferred contracts, got a contract in Maryland. That was the closest I could get to home. I wanted to be with him and spend as much time as home as I could. So over the course of a couple weeks of him being in hospital, watching my family go through what we went through, I was driving home every moment I could. And he would pass. What comes next is something that none of us could have ever anticipated. But a month after my grandfather unexpectedly passed from his brainstem stroke, because at the time his doctors crazily said he was going to make a full recovery. So we had falsified hope, which then obviously became what it became. My father would unexpectedly pass away. And at the time, I was living in Maryland at my contract. My workday had ended. And that entire day, I felt fiercely ill. And I've never been able to explain it. It was not your cold flu. I felt physical pain, discomfort. And that night, I literally laid my head on the couch. And as soon as my head hit the pillow, the phone rang. And it was my hometown police. So I'm freaking out at this point, thinking something has happened. And when the cops ask you, is so-and-so your father? I'm thinking my father is in jail. Oh my God, what could have happened? How can I get him out? I was wrong. The cops had told me that my neighbor had found my father and he had passed away in his own home. And there was no warning signs. And as the cops telling me this, I, to this day, and I mentioned this on a previous episode, want to apologize to the police officer that was handling the call because I lost my shit, cussed him out like no other, because I was trying to explain to him that no, my grandfather had just died. You have the wrong person. And then the words that have haunted me for 10 years. Gina, I'm standing in your dad's home. Your picture is on the wall. It's your dad. The series of events that would come after that call will haunt me for the rest of my life, because when you're 6 hours away, you don't get to do the identification process. To have to send one of my family members to do that hurts me to this day, because the scream on the other end when they verified him is something I'll never forget. And it's hard because I've lost my grandfather. I've now lost my father. My father passed on Monday, and my best friend, who was battling metastatic triple-negative breast cancer, would tell me at the end of that week that if this chemo round didn't work, she was going to pass away. And she did. A week before Christmas. I lost people that literally were my entire world. And that would not stop there. I would go on to lose a couple friends unexpectedly, a couple more family members, my aunt and my uncle. I would lose 7 people in a series of 3.5 years. Because when somebody wasn't passing away, somebody was being diagnosed with an awful terminal disease. And we would care for them, and we would do everything we could to save them, and they would still pass. And I think that's been one of the hardest things for me, is that I take care of people. That is my job. And when you can't save your own family, it's a pain that is immeasurable. When you are in the thick of your grief, or when you experience grief, because it is the sad reality for all of us, you reflect on the losses that happened, whether it's 1 or 7. And as you're reflecting of what has happened, there are practices that can support you, and honoring your grief will also empowering you to move forward. Because I'm not going to be here to tell you when it's time, because there is no moving forward. The person I am will never be the same. But one of the first steps is something that seems so simple, but is often the hardest. And it's giving yourself permission to feel. It's so easy to brush grief aside or try to avoid it because it feels too painful. But I've learned that the only way to move through grief is to first acknowledge it. And here's the thing, grief doesn't have a timeline, it doesn't have an expiration date. So the first piece of advice I have for you is to allow yourself to fully feel the pain. When it comes to grief, it's so tempting to be strong, to suppress your emotions so others don't see you hurting. But you have to give yourself grace in this process, because the grief doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. When you're experiencing this, I highly encourage you to set time aside each day, whether that's 10 minutes or an hour, to sit with your grief. Let yourself cry, be angry. I was so mad when my dad died. I was so angry because my family was already suffering and they were suffering immensely more, and I couldn't help. And I was so mad. And then I just became numb. The important thing is you're going to give yourself space to feel it, because the wild roller coaster of emotions, as cliche as that is to say, is insane. It truly is wild. It changes you. It brings things out in you didn't even know you suppressed. You can't rush through the emotions. You have to let them come as they need. Grief doesn't need to be fixed. It just needs to be acknowledged. Now, here's where healing, when ready, can get a little unconventional. For me, movement became one of the most important tools in processing my grief. It's literally why my brand, Gina Marie Fit, was started. Because it sounds simple, but moving your body through grief can be one of the most cathartic experiences you'll ever have. Whether that's going for a walk, hitting the gym, doing yoga, physical movement can help you process emotions that are too big to put into words. When I was feeling overwhelmed by my grief, sometimes I could hardly find the words to express what I was going through, and I didn't want to burden people with how sad I was. But when I moved my body and I lifted weights, or I went on a walk or went to yoga, it was like I was allowing grief to leave my body. Movement gave me an outlet for the pent-up anger, sadness, confusion, and frustration I was experiencing, like no one-on-one conversation could have at that time. If you're in the midst of grief, I highly encourage you to try to engage in some form of activity every day, even if it's just for 10 minutes and you take a walk. This isn't about PRing or looking for a certain aesthetic or running a marathon. It literally is meant for you to bring your blood flow to your body so that you can feel alive. Don't pressure yourself to be good at it. I was just there because I didn't want to be sitting at home crying in the corner. I literally just wanted to be away from everything I was experiencing, but yet still working through it. And so you're able to use movement as a way to release emotions and reconnect with your body. Grief. It's also a massive identity shift. It's not just the loss of somebody you love, someone else. It's the loss of the person you were before it happened. The person who felt secure, stable, and whole. When grief hits, your sense of self will shatter, and that's a hard pill to swallow. The reality is, you will never be the same person you were before the loss, and that is 1000% okay. Grief forces you to redefine yourself, your values, and your relationship with the world around you. It's about rebuilding piece by piece. And the beautiful part is, through this process, you become a stronger, more resilient version of yourself. Something that you can do when you're experiencing this phase of grief is to spend time reflecting on how grief has changed you. Not just in terms of how sad you are or another person isn't at your dinner table, but in how you now see the world. Maybe you're more compassionate. I know it completely changed how cold I was. You're probably going to be more intentional. I know I refuse to waste time doing things that I don't love or deserve or enjoy because time is so precious. Or you become more aware of your emotional needs. I know that this time of the year, I'm going to get quiet, I'm going to struggle, and I'm going to go through this process of reliving what happens and continually working to heal through it. Something you can do is make a list of the new qualities you've discovered about yourself as a result of your grief journey. This is how you can begin to reclaim your identity, not as the person you were, but as the person you're becoming. Because you can't move forward without acknowledging that your world has changed, and that's where your strength lies. Here's the biggest takeaway I think I want you to hear today. Give yourself grace. And I wish I was staring at myself in a mirror as I film this, but I'm sitting comfortably on my couch, wrapped in a blanket that provides comfort to me because making this podcast episode is really hard because grief is not something you just get over. It's not something that has a clear end date because you're going to live with it forever. I spent so many years being hard on myself, thinking I had to move on and move past it. And I kept hearing people say, time will heal. And time kept passing and people kept passing away. And I got no reprieve. And I just felt like it was never going to end. I was so scared that it was never going to stop. And the people I love would have kept passing away. So I didn't understand this emphasis on, in my opinion, the lame ass quote, everything happens for a reason. I hate it. Please don't say it to me. Not about that, because everything doesn't happen for a reason. However, there's a lesson to be learned from everything that does happen. And what I've learned is that true healing comes when we embrace the grief with grace, when we stop expecting ourselves to snap out of it and instead allow ourselves to heal at our own pace. Let me tell you something. This process is not linear. Some days will be harder than others, and that's okay. You don't need to be productive all the time. You don't need to bounce back instantly. Be gentle with yourself. Because some days, getting out of bed will be your biggest victory. When you feel yourself being too hard on yourself, please stop. It's one of the things I'm terrible at and really working on. Please take a moment to breathe and ask yourself, what would I say to a friend who is grieving like this? Treat yourself with that same level of care, compassion, and understanding, because it's okay to not be okay. And you don't have to do it alone. You can seek support when you need it. One of the hardest parts of grief, to me, in my opinion, is the triggering moments. The anniversaries, the holidays, the random days that hit you like a ton of bricks when you least expect it. Even after years of loss, for me it's been 10, these moments still bring back the pain, and it feels like it happened yesterday. And what I've learned is that is completely normal. I'm here to tell you that it's okay to feel these waves. You don't have to move on just because time has passed. The best way to cope with these anniversaries is to honor your grief and the people you've lost. Maybe it's lighting a candle, doing something you enjoyed together with your loved one, or simply reflecting on their memory. Something I did after 3.5 years, when the last person passed away in my life at that time, I made a shadow box and I put together little mementos and memories of all the people I love. And it sits on the top of my shelf behind my podcast desk. And I look at it, and anytime I'm struggling, I pray to it. And I just tell them, I need you. Please help guide me. And anytime something good happens, I show that shadow box, as weird as you might think that is. And I just let them know as I look at the pictures of their faces that I hope they're proud of my efforts and my energy and the time that I am still here on this earth. When you feel triggered by an anniversary or a reminder of your loss, create a ritual for yourself. Something simple like the shadow box. It'll allow you to honor the grief while still finding a way to continue moving forward. Some of you might like journaling. Some of you might like sitting in nature. Something I do when I go home is I go to the memorial sites and the grave sites and the mausoleum, and I sit, and I do it by myself, not because I think they're physically there. I have had wild moments of confirmation that I know they're in heaven, but their physical last being was in those places. And so I sit with them, and I tell them about my life, and I honor my grief, and I honor them, and I give myself the same permission I'm giving you to take up space in the world, even if it's messy, even if it gets dark, even if it's not the way you thought things would be. I hope this episode gave you some valuable tools and grace as you move through your own grief journey, because grief doesn't define us, it refines us. It changes you, yes, but it also reveals your inner strength, your resilience, and your power. So take a deep breath, trust yourself, and keep showing up for yourself even on the days when it feels impossible. I know that after my dad passed away, I went through a severely dark time. And had it not been for my best friend battling cancer and going home every single weekend, I was driving from Maryland to Pennsylvania every weekend to spend what little time we had together. If I didn't have that, I genuinely don't know where I would be or if I would be here, because I miss them so much. And I was so consumed with what had happened and how sad I was that I couldn't see that there was going to be light on the other side of that darkness, because everything felt impossible. But I'm here to tell you, 10 years later, that the things that I didn't think I would ever overcome or make peace with or get through, I did. There is nothing in this world, it may shake us, it may break us, but it will never ruin us to the point that giving up becomes the option. There is always light on the other side. We just have to remember to turn it on. If this episode resonated with you, share, or somebody you know is grieving too, share with somebody who might need it, because I'm really fortunate to be strong enough now to share this, and it's only because other people shared with me and helped me get through one of the darkest times of my life. And continuing this conversation together is what's important, because we're never alone in our grief. I genuinely think that is one of the most powerful things when we realize it, that grief and loss make us human, and we will all experience this on some level, on some day, whether we're ready or not. All right, y'all, until next time, take care of yourself, take care of those around you, be nice to strangers, but also remember to be bold, to be honest, to be authentic, and continue being you. And above all, be kind to yourself in the processes that are life, because grief, the loss, doesn't just mean the loss of someone. It could be the loss of a job, the loss of a person you thought you'd be with, heartbreak, an injury, an illness. There's a lot of phases of life that we will grieve. And hopefully this episode will get you through when you go through it and help you to know that even though I miss these people more than life itself, I honor them every single day by how I live my life. And I hope that one day when we are reunited and I see their beaming, smiling faces and I get that big hug from my grandfather, that they will say that they are proud for the journey that I walked in the wake of their loss. And I know that you are capable of doing the same. All right, y'all, stay tuned, and I will see you in the next episode.